بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Almighty Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send His blessings upon the Prophet's family, his companions, and the men and women that walk in their footsteps. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among them. Allahumma ameen. I think someone played with the sensitivity of the microphone, so you guys can hear me okay, right? Okay, good. So we're still on Surat al-Baqarah, and tonight inshallah we are covering 275, 273, no, 275 and maybe like 4 or 5 ayat afterwards. If you want to open up your Qur'ans. Surat al-Baqarah has a very particular theme, as we've said before, and the theme of Surat al-Baqarah is the cultivation of this earth for the interests of God, not the interests of man. As I've said repeatedly, the universe in the Qur'an is a God-centric universe. The universe in Christianity, or even in pre-Christian, Aristotelian or Platonic traditions, the universe is a man-centric place, where man is the center of everything, and everything revolves around man. We believe that both us and the universe, we revolve around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We circumvent God, not the other way around. And so everything on this earth is supposed to be cultivated for the interests of the Creator. And we are here to do a job, and we have a mission, and that mission is to be the trustees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth. Which means that if I send someone to do something for me, that person already has a mission, and that mission has been detailed for them. They can't come up with their own purpose. I think man often defines his or her purpose, in this world, when we already have a mandate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when He said to the angels, "Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa," before He created Adam, He said to the angels, "I will establish a trustee of mine on earth to do the work that I want him to do." And it was at that moment that we are given our marching orders, so to speak, as humanity. And it is precisely because we deviate from those marching orders or ignore them that we err and we run into mistakes and problems and troubles. Surah al-Baqarah is divided into those 4 sections, and we are in section 3, and section 3 basically covers the foundations of Imaratul Ard, which is the theme of the surah, cultivating the earth or causing the earth to thrive for the purposes of the creation. It's interesting that you take 2 Arabic words, Imaratul Ard, building the earth, and you actually have to translate it using a long English sentence, always. I'm one who considers myself to be proficient in the English language, and sometimes I struggle to find the right type of translation for these very fundamental words, these Quranic words. What are the foundations of Imaratul Ard? 2 things, as we've said before, al-fikru wal-mal. The right type of ideas and the halal type of wealth. So without the proper ideology, without ideas, you cannot build, because you will be aimless in your efforts. And without financial resources, it also becomes very difficult to build anything. We've covered al-fikr, or ideas. We've taken our time. I think it took us months covering that. And we started last time with the conversation on wealth. And I juxtaposed the Islamic the Islamic financial system with Western financial ideals, and I showed that for the most part, and this is my conviction, you may disagree with me if you'd like, but for the most part, I think that those 2 systems are mutually exclusive. Now, we can still adapt, we can still try to coexist with the Western financial system, because the entirety of the Muslim world is essentially under occupation by Western powers to this day, even though many Muslims have the illusion of independence. but ultimately they are led by rulers who are ultimately loyal to Western powers. Let's be honest. It makes me feel a little bit better because we keep being so harsh and judgmental of our Muslim brothers and sisters, and the Muslim world is this and Muslim leaders are that. Come on. You're telling me that MBS operates for the interest of the Saudi people or Muslims in general? That would be like impossible. And so when you're angry at Saudi Arabia for allowing Halloween or inviting Nicki Minaj, I think what you really need to be angry about is the leadership, because I'm 100% sure that the majority of the Saudi people are opposed to this, just like many. If they say a single word, they're going to be in so much trouble. So that's the type of tyranny that is happening. But again, it is one thing to think that that tyranny is inflicted upon us by other Muslims, and it's different to think that, we're still under occupation. So at least that's something I can work with. It's not impossible to work with that notion. And it's precisely because of this reality that, many people in the Muslim world, adopt the Western system. They adopt Western ideals. They adopt, not to say that everything about the West is wrong, far from it. There are great ideals. This is why we live here. This is why we call ourselves Americans, because there's so much about this country that we still appreciate. There is so much about Western systems that we still appreciate. But when push comes to shove, if we are PhDs in economics and we're sitting at a room at Harvard and we're trying to decide, can we reconcile the Western capitalist interest-based system with the Islamic financial system? I think the answer is going to be no across the board. Can we live in a Western system and try our hardest to avoid things that are haram and stick with the halal financial instruments? That's what all of us are trying to do, right? Every single day. It's a struggle. It's not easy, because you are mingling with the interest-based system every step of the way. And so the purposes of this lecture is not to incite an insurrection or a revolution, right? Maybe a revolution of thought, but we're not going to go with pitchforks at the banks and try to shut them down. That's not the way to change society. The way to change society is to present the alternative. And the alternative has to be of greater value than the existing status quo, right? So, but we have to be educated about these things as Muslims, first and foremost, because sometimes we think less of ourselves and we think less of our ideals. And so, again, to recap, the Islamic financial system has certain premises. Number one, that true ownership resides in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the hands of God. And it's ironic because Westerners would say, well, true ownership is supposed to reside in the hands of the human being. I own this house, that means it's mine. But again, if you actually keep pushing that idea a little bit further, you realize that true ownership is an illusion. It doesn't exist. The vast majority of Americans own their homes fair and square? No. They don't. The vast majority of Americans have loans on their homes. So essentially, who owns the house? If the bank owns the house. The bank is really making you believe that you own the house. Oh, because you have like $50,000 in the house and the bank has $850,000, somehow you think that, this is my house. No, Habibi, this is not your house. This is Wells Fargo's, and he's just letting you live, and he's collecting rent from you. You can play with the paperwork all you want, right? Now, some of you might say, no, wait a second, alhamdulillah, I paid off my house years ago. I live my house, it's mine, fair and square. All right, let's go through the list. What do you have to pay on that house, even though you own it? You have to pay what? You have to pay unreasonable amounts of taxes. You have to pay unreasonable amounts of taxes. Wait a second. I thought it's my house. Government, why are you collecting money for? I'm 65 years old. I don't have kids going to school anymore. Why are you collecting taxes from me? It's rent. Even though we took your $850,000, but we're still going to collect rent from you, right? What else? Homeowners association, all kinds of bills. And then after you pay your taxes, they're going to send you what? They're going to send you tax amendments because, hey, what you pay is not enough. We need more. Oh, the value of your home went up. You have to pay. Give me the difference. Reassessment of taxes, right? And then the government reserves the right. What do you call it? They call it instant domain or public domain or whatever. Like they have the right by law to take a piece of land, of your land, to maybe like, for a road or, a rail track, or for highways or whatever. You have absolutely no say in that. And in times of war, they will use your house as military barracks, and they'll have the soldiers, sleep in your backyard. I know that this sounds far-fetched, but everything is possible. What I say is that there's no true ownership whatsoever. And if you try to transfer your property by selling it to someone else, you're still bleeding money. There is escrow fees, and then there is brokerage fees, and there is further taxes and further assessments. You actually have to account for maybe like 6 to 7% expenses on every transaction if you're trying to sell a real estate property in this country. It's not really true. Not in the real sense, not in the Western sense, and it's certainly not in the Islamic sense, because we believe that we are all tenants, and the true owner of everything is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. That's really important. Now, number two, with this in mind, Islam still allows us to utilize those, that ownership in the short term. So your short term, like, the government can come and say, well, we're all Muslims, and we don't really own anything, therefore give me your house. No, your right to that temporary ownership is still protected per the letter of Islamic law. Number three, there has to be a balance between individual and society's needs, right? The Islamic system is not a capitalist system, like a purely capitalist system where the individual is what matters. Neither is it some type of a communist system either. It's somewhere in between. I would say a little bit closer to capitalism on the continuum, but certainly neither of those two extremes. Number four, there is a blanket prohibition on riba. And riba is going to be the subject of today's conversation, inshallah, per the letter of the next ayah. Number five, solidarity between the members of the same community is of paramount importance. Solidarity means that I have to look out for those who are struggling in my community and share my wealth with them, hence the notions of zakah and sadaqah and so on and so forth. The ultimate goal of the Islamic financial system is the cultivation of this earth in order to serve God, and not to uphold the rights of man or the interests of the human being. My interests and that of societies are all dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, both man and earth are subjugated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His interests, not the other way around. We talked about the concept of infaq, and infaq is spending, for the sake of God. And we also talked about the avoidance of men when we boast about the things that we've spent and we go rub it in other people's faces. You give sadaqah and then you go to the recipient of your charity and say, oh, I hope you're enjoying my charity. How was the food that I dropped yesterday at your doorstep? Was it delicious? Oh my God. See, this is a really nice jacket. I know I have a good taste. See, guys, I gave him this jacket. This is called man, and this type of spirit completely destroys the reward of any good that you have done. We also said that shaitan promises deprivation and insufficiency. We also said that we can spend publicly or we can spend privately, depending on your niyyah. If you give charity in public and you inspire people, mashallah, if you guys go outside to this hallway, there is everyone that participated in the making of this prayer hall. So, we have the plaques on the wall. If you walk out of this door right here, it's on the wall right there in the corridor. And everyone is, all the brothers and sisters in the community that sponsored prayer spaces, their names are up there. Not because they wanted to boast, but because they wanted their children and their families to appreciate, and for those young kids to see, like, my dad participated at the masjid, I need to do the same. right? My family, mashallah, we take ownership in the house of God. We are maintainers, we are custodians of the house of God. And sometimes, if you're struggling, maybe you're better off giving your charity in secret, okay? We also said that you need to be intentional in terms of who you give your charity to. It's halal for you to, let's say that you have family overseas, so it's halal for you to say, okay, hey mom, hey dad, hey cousin, I'm going to send you $3,000, please spend that, give that to charity over there. This is my zakat. It's okay to do that, okay? But you know what's better than doing this? Is to actually verify, is to do your homework, is to put some effort, and maybe ask your family. I want you guys to identify, let's say that your family is in Afghanistan. I want you to identify 10 families who are honest people, work really hard, but they're not able to make ends meet. Or maybe 10 kids that we can sponsor for a scholarship. Or maybe 10 young couples that we can sponsor for marriage. Just be intentional about where you spend your charity. It'll be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially people who don't ask. People who have the dignity. They're poor, but they have honor. They don't want to ask for help. Those are the people that I need to recruit and say, hey, I would like to give you, some money. And a lot of brothers and sisters ask me, do I need to specify, do I need to tell the person that this is my zakah in order for it to count? You don't need to say anything. You don't need to say that it's from you, right? It's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you send your zakah and let them benefit from it, but you don't need to state any other details. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we will continue with a major subject pertaining to the Islamic financial system, which is the subject of riba, the subject of usury. Okay? Remember in the farewell sermon of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is months before he passed away. So he's addressing about 122,000 people. And for those of you who may think, okay, wait a second, how did he give a khutbah to 122,000 people? Like, we give a khutbah here to 800 people, and sometimes the sisters all the way in the back, they can't hear because of the noise or the kids or whatever. How do you address 120,000 people in an age where there was no microphones or speaker systems? So the people in ancient times, they developed this incredible system where there will be circles made of people. So the speaker is in the center, and then there is the most inner circle maybe has 5 or 6 people. And then there is maybe 50 feet radius. There is a wider circle, maybe 10 people, and then a wider circle of 20 people and so forth. And everyone is assigned. If you hear the speaker, you are repeating what the speaker is saying, facing the audience out loud until the very last person is able to hear, which means that there's always a delay. By the time the words are transferred from the speaker to the very outer radius, it's probably 4 or 5 minutes or something, because it's such a large number. But this also tells you something about the accuracy of that transmission. And the science of hadith is such a unique science. Why? Because nowhere else in history had man ever witnessed a process where every word needs to be verified and it needs to be articulated and transmitted in verbatim in the same exact way without a single ounce of change. And that is very difficult. Remember, with the youth we play the what's that game called? Phone. It's called, yes, phone. So we start, for example, I love biryani. And then the first kid whispers that same sentence to the ear of the second kid, and then the third and the fourth, and then, by the time it comes to you, Netanyahu is going to hell. Like the absolute most unrelated thing, it's still valid, I think. But the most unrelated thing to what was said. Why? Because we have a tendency not to be accurate and not to verify what we're saying. Wait a second. No, repeat it. Say it again. In or at. We have to be very, very concise and very, very accurate in the way that we transmit words. And many of our social problems actually arise from our failure to transmit statements with precision. We keep adding our own spices, deliberately or not. We keep adding, he said this, but I really think it's that. And then we start interpreting and reinterpreting. By the time it made a round, it's been completely distorted. So we have to be very careful, because this is actually considered, a form of lying. Okay, and it's haram to transmit something that is not accurate. So you verify. If you don't know for sure, keep it to yourself until you know. All right. So the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to this massive crowd. Everyone has to take his words verbatim and articulate them the way exactly they are, so that every single ear is hearing the same exact thing. Isn't that incredible? This is how the ijazah system also works. If I have a sheikh, and let's say, like, for example, I sat with Sheikh Yahya al-Ghuthani in Istanbul for months, and he was reading from Imam Nawawi's book, Kitab al-Adhkar. And Sheikh Yahya al-Ghuthani actually shared with us his ijazah, his own chain of transmission that goes all the way to Imam Nawawi himself. So Imam Nawawi read to his students, and the students read to the students, all the way until came to Sheikh Yahya himself. And so many of the students, at that particular dars, they were planning to get their ijazah in Kitab al-Adhkar. Of course, I did not sit through the entire book. I only caught like maybe 3 months. He had it every Sunday, so maybe like 1/3 of the book. And I plan, inshallah ta'ala, at some point to go back in order to listen. They call it, in Islamic sacred knowledge, they call it as-sama', listening. You listen to sacred knowledge being recited to you, and then you get your ijazah, and you become certified to teach. So your name is added to the chain. So now your certificate has your name, and then if you teach the same book to somebody else, then that person's name is added to the certificate, in addition to everyone that came before them. This is and ijazah means permission. It's a permission to teach. You're now, allowed to teach this. And of course, they do this in memorization of the Quran. They do this in calligraphy. They do this in all kinds of things where people receive their ijazat, right? And so for you, this sounds like so amazing today. But at the Prophet's time, that was the norm. People were just being very, very accurate, all right? So he's standing, I digressed a little bit, but I want to go back to the farewell sermon. The Prophet ﷺ is standing, and he's addressing 122,000 people. And one of the things that he says, in that sermon, he asks the believers, which city is this? And some of them, they were like confused. I mean, did they change the name of Mecca? I mean, I'm not sure. Is this a rhetorical question? Is he really asking? So some of the companions questioned themselves, why is he asking? And he said, no, I'm asking you for real. What is the name of the city? And they said, this is the city of Mecca. Okay, great. What is today? When was the farewell sermon in the season of Hajj? Which day was it? The day of Arafah, right? And the day of Arafah is the most important day of the year, right? So they said, well, it's the day of Arafah. And he asked them, which month is this? And that was the month of Dhul Hijjah. So, of course, the Kaaba is the most sacred place on earth. The month of Dhul Hijjah is the most sacred month. And the day of Arafah is the most sacred day of the month of Dhul Hijjah. So what is he trying to do? He's trying to establish to them the sanctity of the place and the time. This is so inviolable. It is so sacred, right? And then he said to them, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with that in mind, فَإِنَّ دِمَاءَكُمْ وَأَمْوَالَكُمْ وَأَعْرَاضَكُمْ حَرَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ كَحُرْمَةِ يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا فِي شَهْرِكُمْ هَذَا فِي بَلَدِكُمْ هَذِهِ. Let life, wealth, and dignity also be inviolable, also be sacred to you. The life of other human beings, the dignity of other human beings, and the wealth of another human being. Let that too be on the list of inviolable, and the list of the sacred, and the list of the sanctified, and let that be as sacred as today, the day of Arafah, as sacred as the month of Al-Hijjah, and as sacred as the Kaaba itself. When you go to Umrah, and then you do your tawaf and you do your sa'i, and you just have all these fuzzy feelings, right? And you're enjoying yourself so much, and then you come home and you feel like you've achieved something amazing, I've honored the sanctity of the Kaaba. Well, if you borrowed money from someone and then you return that money on time, the Prophet ﷺ says this in the sight of God is just as honorable. And paying off that debt is just as honorable, because the wealth of your brothers and sisters is just as inviolable, just as sacred. You know, the word haram, we often say al-masjid al-haram. In our conversations, when we say haram, what does haram mean? Haram means forbidden. Haram means, prohibited, something that is not permitted to do, okay? But haram also means something that should not be violated, a boundary that should not be crossed. That's why they call it al-masjid al-haram. Or, in short, sometimes we say haram. By the removal of the alif, it just becomes haram, with one instead of two syllables. What is the haram? It is the inviolable campus. The campus that has boundaries that should never be violated. I don't know how recent you guys have done Umrah, but there's a lot of locusts in Mecca. There's these swarms of locusts that kind of attack the city once in a while. I'm not bothered by insects in general. Like, I don't have any issues with bugs. Some people just they freak out about bugs. It really doesn't bother me. But it doesn't matter how you feel. You just can't kill anything in the haram. So you're literally praying, and all these like locusts around you, thousands of them, they're making ruku' and sujood, like on your prayer rug. It was one point when I was making sujood in Mecca, and I literally, in order to make sujood, I had to push the locusts like to make room on my rug in order to pray. It was that many of them. And there was this other kid that was stomping the locusts, right? And so his mom ran and picked him up, and he said, "You can't kill anything. This is the haram. This is the inviolable mosque. You cannot cross these boundaries here. Every life shall be made sacred here," right? Now, of course, if the swarm of scorpions, we would have maybe, thought differently. If something that is harmful, or it's snakes or something like this, in order to protect yourself, that's a different story. But the Prophet ﷺ says that wealth is inviolable. Wealth is a red line. Other people's money is a red line. People who get into business partnerships with the intention of scamming others. People who try to sell something and downplay its flaws. People who list things on the internet, on eBay or whatever, in order to sell it and hide its flaws. People who try to sell a car without clearly disclosing all of its issues and all of its problems. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, even if it's a tiny little tear in the leather seat, even if it's a tiny little tear. My son has been shopping for a car. Boys, when they become like 18 and 19, they start going nuts about cars. He already has a car, but he's thinking of selling it and bidding on another car online with like more muscle, whatever it is. I love cars too, but I don't like to waste money on cars. So he goes on this website, and I'm not going to state which website it is. I've never seen anything like this in my life. They took picture of every single little flaw in the car, and the report is like this long, with every mechanical issue in the car, every history of maintenance, any problem, anything that was replaced, anything that is not OEM was stated in the report. Okay. Now, they do that for liability purposes, because they take personal responsibility for those vehicles. But we're supposed to do that with everything in life. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you other people's wealth is inviolable. That is a boundary you cannot cross. So we take things seriously. You borrow someone's jacket, or my best friend's jacket. I've seen people wearing the same jacket for like years. Oh, mashallah, this is a really nice jacket. Where'd you buy this jacket? No, this is not my jacket. It's my friend's jacket. I said, dude, you've been wearing this for years. He said, yeah, I borrowed it like 5-7 years ago. You haven't returned it? Like, that's okay? I'm sure he's fine. He sees me wearing it all the time. He doesn't say anything. Well, maybe he's just out of embarrassment. Maybe he really is upset. Did you check? Like, this is you took this with the intention of borrowing it for a day or two, and you return it right away. You borrow someone's book. People come to the masjid and they take our Qur'ans because they think it's public property. It belongs to the masjid. That means it belongs to everyone. It's like, really? You want to live the rest of your life with a curse over your head that you stole something from Allah's house? We don't take these things seriously. You borrow a book from a friend. Oh, I'll read this and I'll return it. You know, those of us who are old enough remember the good old days when people used to borrow books, right? People don't borrow books anymore because unfortunately they don't read anymore. But if you are still in that good habit, borrow the book, read it, and then what? Return it. Because other people's, he says, وَأَمْوَالَكُمْ حَرَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ. This should be made inviolable. It's a boundary that cannot be crossed, right? So with that in mind, maybe we'll be able to appreciate why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about riba in a much more menacing and a much more threatening way than any other crime in the Quran. Nothing else in the Quran even comes close. In fact, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, committing riba once is worse than committing zina 36 times. And he never uses this particular number. He always uses 7, 70, right? 10, 100, 1,000, 100,000. He said 36 times, which is way more specific than any of his number designations in all the other ahadith. This is how serious this is. Riba, according to most of the scholars, is destructive for a variety of reasons. So everyone knows that it's haram, but they disagree as to why it's haram. And that's why I want to go into this list with you, right? So usury. Why is usury haram? And I know that you're still wondering, okay, Imam, can you define riba exactly first? And I'll get to that. But I'm going to go off of the vague idea that you may have of what usury is, and we're going to go. Number one, أخذ أموال الناس بالباطل. Taking other people's wealth unjustifiably, because that is what riba is. Let's say I'm selling this, and I said, no, take it, it's okay, you can pay me tomorrow. This is going to be $10. Pay me tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes. What is the agreement that the price of this commodity is how much? $10. I stated the price. The buyer agreed to the price, or maybe maybe I said 15. And then we agreed on 10. No. I'll just pay 10 for this. Okay, fine. I don't have money right now. Can I pay you tomorrow? Yeah, sure, no problem. Pay me tomorrow. So they take the commodity into their possession, and then they come tomorrow and they say, okay, I'm so sorry. I really don't have any money. Can you wait a little bit more? And then I say, oh yeah, sure. You can pay me next week, as long as you pay me a little bit more. Pay me 20 instead of 15. That is the very definition of taking someone else's wealth unjustifiably, because you've already agreed on a value, and you're for the time that person is buying, you want a financial compensation. That's the very definition of riba. We're going to get to that, inshallah. Number two, يمنع الناس من الاشتغال بالمكاسب. Riba, or usury, makes people lazy in the pursuit of business and financial interests. Because, think about it. If you own a house and there is a really solid tenant for this house, and the house is your cash cow, you own the asset, you have very limited expenses, and the tenant pays you $7,000 a month. Good deal or not? Let's say your house is like, $600,000. That's a pretty good return on rent. Why would you ever think about changing that arrangement? It's pretty awesome. I don't need to work. Now replace house with riba. Instead of $600,000 in the house, it's $600,000 that are lent to people. And they pay you $7,000 a month. Would you have any motivation to invest that money anywhere else? It's a pretty sweet deal. Now, what's the difference between the first and the second? The house example and the loan example. What's the difference? It's the same exact return, the same exact asset invested. But what's the difference? Well, it's your money either way. Say again? Well, the person received benefit in both cases. But why is one haram and why is one halal?
You have risk in the house, expenses.
Maybe because there is risk involved. Yes, we're going to talk about risk in a minute. Risk sharing is really important. That's actually point number 5 here, I think. But the primary difference between those two cases is that the first is buying and selling. There's a transaction. There's an actual transaction. I will sell you space in my house, and in return, you're going to pay me $7,000 a month. That is a legitimate business transaction, right? Where the commodity that is being sold and the price for that commodity are not the same thing. Let me repeat that. If the commodity and the price that is paid for the commodity are the same, then that could potentially be under riba. And we're going to talk about these details in a minute. But as long as what I am selling and the price that I'm receiving for selling it are not the same thing, then it becomes a business transaction, and we can always talk about what is okay and what is not okay when it comes to business transactions. So the first case, I am selling space in my house and I am receiving a financial compensation from this. That is it's like selling a chicken, or like selling a chair, or like selling a car, right? It's like selling labor. Isn't that literally what it is? When I work, and let's say I'm a general contractor and I build houses, or literally I work the fields and I am carrying buckets of corn. I am selling my time and effort and my sweat, and I am getting something in return. All that is legitimate business transactions. But in the second case, I am selling 5 and getting in return 15. The commodity and the price are of the same species, as they say, min jinsin wahid, and that is what makes it riba. We're going to get to that. Number 3, انقطاع المعروف بين الناس. It obliterates kindness between people, because now it's just about profitability. If you know that you have a cousin that needs help, and you have $10,000, you're always concerned, I need to invest the $10,000. I want to make sure that $10,000 is making money. But your cousin says, I need your $10,000 for 2 months. So you refuse to do this because he's not going to give me any return. Unless you give me 10% return, I can't give it to you. I shouldn't use percentages because now we're getting into interest, and I don't want to confuse you. I'm keeping it riba, usury. There's a specified amount of illegitimate growth. Number 4, it worsens the disparities between people. The rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer. It really, think about it. This happens in America every single day. As you get wealthier, you're paying less taxes. You are paying less fees. You're paying less fines. You're making a lot more money. I've seen it. I've been in real estate myself for so many years. Every year, the higher my income, the lesser my taxes. Welcome to America. Because you're able to manipulate your tax returns and manipulate your expenses and manipulate your assets legally, right? It's called tax avoidance, and that is perfectly legal in America, in a way that helps you, avoid taxes. Whereas someone that works in a cubicle, my father-in-law, alayhi rahmatullah, he worked for Intel almost his entire life. And he used to pay like about 35% of his income in taxes. Taxes in Canada is like 45%. It's like, oh my God. I literally work my behind off 9 hours a day, and I give 50% of my earnings for the government to mishandle. Right? So it worsens the disparities, in society. those who are poor or those who are on limited income, they have to keep using interest-based transactions because otherwise they can't buy the things that they need. I need a TV, I need a car, everything is on credit. Everyone, oh, I'm making payments on this, I'm making payments on this, I'm making payments on that. And all these other sharks, they keep showing up on TV. If you have more than $50,000 in credit card debt, call us and we're gonna get it all consolidated. Debt itself, back in the day we used to say people buy and sell money. Now they buy and sell debt. Like literally you have a property and you borrow money against that property, so that creates a note on the property. This is a note of indebtedness. Let's say it's $1 million. And so you are the creditor, you are now the note holder, and the person that owns the property owes you money. All right? But because now I need some cash, I will take the note and I'll sell it to someone else for $800,000. And I'll take the 800. So that other person becomes the note holder, becomes your creditor. It's a satanic system. It's a satanic system. What happens in all of this? Wealth gets lost. And the wealth gets wealthier and the poor gets poorer. Number 5, which is what the brother said earlier, عدم المشاركة في المخاطرة. In the interest, in the riba-based transaction, they're not sharing the risk of that transaction. Whereas, if I bought this for $10 and I'm trying to sell it to you for $15, in order to make $5, I have to take the risk of buying it in the first place. Because what if I don't sell it right away? What if it sits in my garage for 6 months and I don't sell it? I already risked $10 of my money. And so there is risk involved. And when you buy it from me, there is also risk involved. But with riba, there is no risk. Because I will get my money either way. Right? Now, what does the word riba come from? Linguistically speaking. It sounds like another word that we're all familiar with. Rabb. Riba comes from Rabb. What is the meaning of Rabb? Rabb is Lord. The Lord that gives you love, and He's your caregiver. He elevates you. He nurtures you. This is what the father is supposed to do, to his own family. Love, nurture, support, elevation, guidance, wisdom. That's what the Lord of the house. There's the Lord of the universe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at its linguistic level, the word Rabb just means Lord. Not the Lord of all the universe, but any Lord. So the Lord of the land, the Lord of the house, the Lord of the community. In the Middle Ages, the word Lord was also a title that was bestowed on people, right? So lordship implies nurturing and caring and elevating something. But what if that growth is based in the wrong foundations? I mean, plants grow. There is the apricot tree that grows in my backyard, and then there is these random weeds that just grow out of nowhere. They may actually grow into 2 trees, but one of them will yield fruit and the other one is just occupying space and destroying the rest of my backyard. The first one I want to keep, and the second one is I want to destroy. It is growth in both cases, and that's why riba resembles many of those other words that we are familiar with, because riba is the bad kind of growth. This is the haram type of growth. The Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, اجتنبوا السبع الموبقات. Refrain from engaging in the 7 vices. What are the 7 vices that are cursed by God in the Islamic tradition? What are those 7 vices? Murder is one of them. Shirk. Shirk is definitely one of them, right? Interestingly, zina is not on the list of 7 because, thank you, because adultery or fornication is considered to be like a spur of the moment sort of sin of passion. as opposed to premeditated sins. So, even though it is still a kabira from the major sins, but it is not, on this list of the 7 most destructive, absolutely most destructive sins, right? Let me go through the list. Shirk, as sister said, to commit polytheism, to attribute other gods, alongside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 2, sihr. Sihr, what is sihr? Yeah, sihr is to engage in black magic or sorcery. All right? Of course, there are conversations on whether or not any of such efforts are capable of harming us. But if someone believes in black magic and engages in black magic, that removes you from the faith, right? Number 3, murder, al-qatl, right? Number 4, riba, usury. Number 5, aklu mal al-yatim, taking the wealth of an orphan that you've been entrusted with. You're a custodian of an orphan, and that orphan has an inheritance, and then you end up squandering that inheritance because the little kid, is helpless, can't do anything. Man, that is the absolute worst crime, right? Number 6, at-tawalli yawm az-zahf, desertion. The day you meet the enemy, and you've already signed up to defend your community, and you've gone through the training, and you voluntarily participated, but because you're overwhelmed by the enemy, you desert. Desertion is one of those vices, because now you're putting everyone else's life in danger. The other soldiers are counting on you, and thought that you're going to have their backs. Now you just run like a coward, right? At the hour when they need you the most. At-tawalli yawm az-zahf. And the last one is qadhful muhsanat, to slander the clean and pure women, and to say things behind their backs that would basically question their integrity, or question their modesty. Yes. I mean, because you're not a believer. This is for believers who engage in any of those things. Nifaq removes you from the category of iman in the first place. Like, you are in a much worse condition. But any believer can engage in one of these. So this would be destructive for the believer. Nifaq, you're not a believer anymore. Say again? Exactly, but then deep inside they're not believers. And they will be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the day of judgment, worse than the kuffar, for sure. But it's like لَيْسَ بَعْدَ الْكُفْرِ ذَنْبٍ. There is nothing worse than committing hypocrisy. So all of this is dwarfed by hypocrisy. So that's why it's substantially worse. But again, nifaq or hypocrisy removes you from the fold of the faith in the first place, and therefore, if I say, well, nifaq is worse than theft, well, of course. But theft is dangerous for you as a believer, but it does not remove you from the fold of the faith. In the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ آكِلَ الرِّبَى. Allah has cursed one who benefits from riba. Feeds their kids from riba, buys. Well, I have to make a distinction, but by the way, between those who make money off of riba and those who feel compelled to engage in usury because they don't have a choice. Because sometimes you really need the money so much, and the only possibility that you have is someone that deals with riba, so you have to go to them. So they're not the same. So the person that benefits off of usury and the person that is victimized by it are not the same thing, right? لَعَنَ اللَّهُ آكِلَ الرِّبَى. The one that benefits from riba is cursed by God. وَمُوَكِّلُهُ. And if that person has a representative, maybe your attorney or your broker, وَكَاتِبُهُ. And the one that notarizes it, وَشَاهِدَيْهِ. And if it has 2 witnesses. It's pretty scary stuff. Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, radiyallahu anhu, Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, he is the grandson of Imam Ali Zainul Abidin, ibn al-Husayn ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, حرم الله الربا كي يتقارض الناس. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made riba haram to encourage people to borrow from each other. And He says that when we borrow from each other, it in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's 10 times better than sadaqah. Wait, what does that mean? Are you guys wrapping your head around this? Let's say that I calculated my zakah this year, and it's $2,500. All right. So I go to the masjid and I give it to the masjid, give this to the poor. All right. Versus taking my $2,500 and giving it as a loan to someone that is interest free without any riba. Which one would be more beneficial to the person? Imam Ja'far says the loan. Why? Because the loan has terms. The loan has conditions. The loan comes with consequences. If someone comes to me and says, I need $2,500, I need to know why. What are you going to use it for? Oh, I need to buy this inventory for my business. Or I need to put my kid in college. I need to do this, I need to do that. And I am monitoring the process, and there is conditions, and I need to get this money back. So when I get this money back, I'll use it again and do good things with it, and then use it again and again and again. But if I take the $2,500 and I give it to the masjid, and then this family got $25, and that family got $75, and this family got $2,500, $15, and this person bought some food, and that person bought a t-shirt, it's all gone. It's all gone on the small things. And hence, the American statement, teach a man how to fish versus give a man a fish. And so sadaqah is giving a man a fish. But a loan, an interest-free, a clean loan, qard hasan, as the Quran says, is much more beneficial because it encourages good social relations, it builds trust between people, and it helps recycling that wealth to continue to benefit society and to continue to benefit community. حرم الله الربا كي يتقارض الناس, Imam al-Sadiq says. To continue here to discourage or to paint an ugly picture of usury. And again, I have not equated usury with bank-based interest transactions yet. All right, I'm walking you through the process very diligently and very slowly. All right. In Bukhari, on Sumr ibn Jundub radiallahu anhu, the Prophet ﷺ used to tell his dreams. When his dreams are positive, he used to tell his dreams to the companions. What is the sunnah, by the way, on dreams and nightmares?
If it's a good dream, you share it. If it's a bad dream, you keep it to yourself.
Right, absolutely. If it's a good dream, you share it to bring hope to other people. Oh my God, you're not going to believe what I saw in my dream tonight. It's something so awesome. Okay, great. Everyone is happy. Inshallah, it happens to you. And when you dream or you had a nightmare and something really, really negative, not only that you keep it to yourself, you completely ignore it like it never happened, because it's all from shaitan. He's trying to mess you up. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more merciful than that. So the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to have these dreams, and so he would share his good dreams. But there was one time that he shared a really scary dream, which is uncharacteristic of him. And in that dream he says that he was invited by two people, most likely angels, reading the language or the context of the hadith, and they walked him to a riverbank. And when he looked into the riverbank, it was the water was red as blood. Realized that the water was actually blood flowing and it was not actually water. But in the river itself, the Prophet ﷺ describes there was someone swimming. And that person is swimming in the river. And there is someone that is standing on the riverbank with a pile of rocks. And every so often, the person that's swimming actually comes to the riverbank, dripping in blood, and opens his mouth so wide, and that person throws a rock in his mouth. He munches on it, and then he chews on it and swallows it, and then he goes back and he swims. And then he comes back for another rock, and then he goes back and swims. He comes back for another rock, and he swims. And the Prophet ﷺ says, one of these two is the person that deals with riba, that deals with usury. Which one? The one that throws the rock or the one that receives it? The one that is receives it, that is swimming in blood, right? Why rock? Why rock? Because it's a reference to the Quranic statement about hellfire. وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. It's fueled by people and rocks. By the way, have you ever tried to burn a rock? I mean, like they make furnaces out of rocks. Like rocks, it would have to be like massive lava level, like volcano level temperatures for rocks to melt, right? So why does it say, وَقُودُهَا, it's fueled by human beings and rocks, in order to indicate what? In order to indicate like the nuclear holocaust that is happening in there, all right? It is that hot. And so that person keeps swallowing what he thinks is of value, but in reality, you're just adding fuel to the fire. See how descriptive that scene is? It's absolutely frightening. Very, very serious. But what are the types of riba then? The types of riba. There are two types in accordance with the absolute vast majority of the scholars. All right? One, everyone agrees is haram. The second one, the majority says is haram, but there's a small minority that follows an opinion of Abdullah ibn Abbas. And all of that is questionable, but again, in the interest of honesty, I have to share with you all of it. But let's talk about the first one because there's no disagreement on this one. It's called riba nasi'ah. It is the usury of postponement. Riba nasi'ah. Are you familiar with the Arabic term ahlun nasi'? So there was a group of Arabs that had a tremendous respect for the sanctified or the sacred months. What are the sacred months of the Islamic calendar? Okay, let's start with the easy ones. Okay, so Rajab is kind of like by itself, lost in the year, like lonely. All right, and then Sha'ban and Ramadan will pass. Those are not from the sacred months. So Rajab, and we're going to skip Sha'ban and Ramadan, and then it'll be Dhul Qa'dah, followed by Dhul Hijjah, and then the first month of the new year, which is Al-Muharram. Those are the four. Those are the four. Again, Rajab, Dhul Hijjah, Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, and Al-Muharram. And it's so important when you think about it. The logic is amazing because the Hajj season usually starts in Dhul Qa'dah, at least back in ancient times when people had to travel long distances and mount their horses and so forth and get there on time. So essentially it starts in Dhul Qa'dah. And you don't want people to be attacking each other when the Hajjis are on their caravans, traveling to Hajj. Then Dhul Hijjah is the month itself, and Muharram is people are coming home. So that was like the one season that is blocked. No atrocities, don't commit any acts of violence or attack people or yell at people or scream. Your sin is actually multiplied in those 3 months. That's very serious. And Rajab leads you to which season? To the season of Ramadan. Rajab is sort of like the prelude of the season of Ramadan, so it kind of gets you in the mood. So there was this, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّ عِدَّةَ الشُّهُورِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ 12 شهرا. The count of the months in the judgment of Allah is 12. يَوْمَ خَلَقَ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ فِيهَا أَرْبَعَةٌ حُرُمٌ. And that designation was made on the day He created heavens and earth. Right? And 4 out of them shall be made inviolable, sacred. Subhanallah. So there was a group of the Arabs that took that so seriously. This is pre-Islamic Arabia, by the way. They took the 4 sacred months so seriously that they called them Ahlun Nasi, the people of postponement. What does that mean? When they realize that the Arabs are engaged in war, and that war is about to encroach on one of the sacred months, they do what? They would literally postpone the month. They would change the order. They would move Rajab to a later month. Imagine that. Oh my God! It's the month of October. No, it's too early for October. Okay, we're just going to make it November. And October can come after January. Like this is literally what they did. But they didn't do this arbitrarily. They did this out of respect. Of course, it was also foolish because it was, if there's any value to the month of Rajab, then you need to stick to it and stop people from fighting instead of changing the order of the months. But this is why this is what we can control. We cannot control the warring parties, but at least we can control the designation. And they were like seen as the priests of the Arabs, so everyone respected them. In fact, it was one of them that violated the church that Abraha built in Yemen, and he wanted to invite all the Arabs to abandon the Kaaba and come, visit his own shrine. It was one of Ahlul Nasi that violated it, and that's why he marched his army north in order to destroy the Kaaba. SubhanAllah, it's interesting history. But Ahlul Nasi is postponed, to postpone something, right? Riba Nasi'ah is riba that is haram as a result of postponement, right? So you specify a price for extending the term of a debt. You specify a price for extending the term of a debt. So like I said earlier, that debt is born either out of an actual loan. So let's say I gave you $500 and say, no, this is interest free, you're good. As long as you pay me back by the end of the month, inshallah, we're good. Come the end of the month and you're in financial trouble, so you say, I'm so sorry, I don't have any money, can you give me another month? Oh yeah, absolutely, I give you another month, as long as you pay me an extra $100. So the price of the extra month in this case is $100. That's the very definition of riba in the Quran. All right? It also happens when we are buying and selling. So let's say you agreed on a price and you say, okay, it's $100, pay me $50 now and pay me $50 next week. Come the time next week for that, debt, I mean, it's really just the balance of the transaction to be fulfilled, and that person doesn't have any money, in which case asks for more time. So I have to postpone the repayment. That postponement will cost you. You have to pay me an extra $100 for the postponement. And where does all this come from? Like, why do we ever consider imposing, riba on the transaction? Why can't we just wait? Why did I ask for extra money? Because I don't want my money to be sitting there without growth. Because I'm thinking to myself, I could have invested this money somewhere. I could have bought Ethereum with it, right? Why should I give it to someone and it doesn't make any income? Is always that fear of missing out, that concern of my money, where in reality you could invest in Ethereum and lose 40% of your value, or you could invest in anything or buy something and still lose a huge value. So when I buy and sell, there's always risk involved, and it works with market dynamics, and it requires you to do your research and to do some effort and contact the right people and be smart in the way you invest. But with riba, the only person that takes the risk is the debtor, not the creditor. The creditor is secure. I will get my money anyway, and a cherry on top, the one that gets the short end of the stick is the debtor, right? Yes.
So, does this also apply to like payment plans? Like, if I'm selling a product, this happens with so many things. Like, if you pay it in one shot, it's $5,000. If you pay it over 6 months, it's $1,000 a month, so it's $6,000. If you pay it in a year, it's $1,500 a month, so you're paying X amount of dollars. Is that the same concept? If you're technically paying for the same program, you're just paying it over time, and then does it make a difference? Obviously, it makes a difference, but like, if I can't pay it all in one shot, I can't put $5,000 down. Does that mean I'm paying riba technically if I take the 6 month or 1 year?
So what you're saying is that the price itself differs at the very beginning when the agreement is made.
Yeah, from before you even pay.
Yes. No, what I'm talking about here is that it was changed in the process. Okay, and so we'll get to that. These are complicated transactions. We're going to get to this. I'm giving you the absolute bare bones here. We're going to start with the most fundamental, simplest transactions, and then we make our way up into more complex, more compound transactions. So again, I have given you money, and you're supposed to pay me back next week you couldn't. And that's when I say, okay, fine, you can wait another week, but you have to pay me a little bit extra. You know who used to do that and made a fortune out of this at the Prophet's time, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Abdurrahman was a great merchant. No, Abdurrahman did business. It was Al-Abbas, his uncle. Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib. In Khutbatul Wada', in the farewell sermon, he actually says, وَإِنَّ رِبَى الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ مَوْضُوعٌ وَأَوَّلُهَا رِبَى عَمِّي Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib. So his own uncle used to engage in that riba, and he made a fortune in the days of Jahiliyyah. So the Prophet ﷺ instructed him, keep your assets, but do not engage in riba anymore. All right? So a lot of Arabs made a ton of money, from this process. Raven?
Doesn't some of how like with the riba and like giving the loan out with the interest because you like with the money, does that also tie into what you talked about last week of having profit for profit's sake?
Sure, but I mean, sometimes I guess I was casting aspersions on capitalism. I was going on a rant, right? and I talked about how capitalism implies the idea of making money for the sake of making money. But I didn't say that it was haram to do that. Sometimes like you can't tell someone, like sometimes our intentions behind making profit are different. Maybe, so I have everything I need, yet I still think like I need to be busy, right? I don't want to be sitting idle at home, right? Or what if something happens in the future? Or maybe like I want to feel a sense of success. I'm motivated to do more. Like sometimes it's not even clear in our minds why. But what I'm saying is that it's harmful for society. Not necessarily haram, but it's harmful for society for profitability to be the only purpose of engaging in business. I need to generate other reasons and other needs. Otherwise, we just become purebred capitalists. And that has not really helped the world. All right? But riba is different because riba is haram by its very definition. Although I agree with you that it kind of follows the same trends that make the other thing very, very harmful, but this one is impermissible by its very definition. Yes.
What about late payment? Like we decided that we're going to make a payment end of this month, and then you didn't return the money, and now there's late payment, and it keeps accruing. Is that a form of riba too?
Again, that's another complex transaction where there is interest that is being a compound form of interest on the balance, and interest on every day that passes without making payments. That's a more complex transaction. We're going to get to this. The short answer is if interest accrues, then it would definitely be riba. But the question is flat late fees. Would that be considered riba or not? We will address that inshallah ta'ala, maybe next week. But I want to get through the basics here at least. The second type. So again, all scholars agree that riba nasi'ah, the usury of postponement, is haram. The second one is called riba al-fadl. Al-fadl from tafadul, disparity. Riba al-fadl. And riba al-fadl basically states that it specifies a disparity in value between two items of the same species. I know that I'm using technical terms, but if you actually read the Arabic, it's a lot more complicated. So this is a simplified version, all right? Specifying a disparity in value between two items of the same species or the same category. For example, you have gold at home. My sisters, you have gold. That when you got married, your mother-in-law gave you this beautiful necklace as a gift, and it's this her mom gave it to her, and it stayed in the family, but you just wanted to sell it. So you thought about selling it, but then you're like, no, I'm just going to go to the Sharif jewelers, and I'll exchange this for a newer necklace. Now let's say that what's the average weight, let's say, of a really good quality necklace? Yes. All the sisters like, I don't know, maybe like 500 grams. What's a good weight? I really don't know. Like
20.
let's go with that. Let's go with that. Okay, from now on, that's the standard weight of necklaces. Okay, so 20 ounces. You weighed it. You put it on the scale, and it weighed 20 ounces worth of, let's say, 21 karat gold. And then the value of the gold today, or 20 ounces. Well, it's what, like how much is it, like per ounce today?
About 2,900.
It's pretty expensive. Let's say 3,000. So 3,000, 20 ounces of gold. We're talking about how much? It's a lot. Okay? And then you go to the jewelers. And then you replace the 20 ounce necklace that you have with another 20 ounce necklace, but you pay double the amount. That is called riba al-fadl. Why is it riba? Because the two commodities are of the same species. They belong to the same species. Bilal radiallahu anhu once came to the Prophet ﷺ and said to him, Ya Rasulullah, here's a bowl of really, really delicious fresh dates. So he asked him, where did you get the dates from? They look so fresh. He said, I had 2 pounds of dates from last year, and I took them to the date market, and I replaced them with 1 pound of fresh date from this year's harvest. It's old, sure, from last year, but again, it's not that he took his dates and sold them and then took the money and bought fresh dates. No, he went to the same guy and he exchanged. That exchange is haram, is considered riba al-fadl, if the two items that are being exchanged are, again, of the same category or the same, I shouldn't say the same category, they have to be the same species. All right? And in order to avoid confusion, the Prophet ﷺ actually in a hadith specified, because this can get dicey. Like, can I replace my lazy boy sofa on Craigslist with someone else's, like leather? It gets complicated. So the Prophet ﷺ specified that this happens in 7 categories, right? 2 of them are gold and silver, and the 5 other categories are all like crop, like dates, barley, certain types of sha'ir that's called bar, very specific, and I can share the specific 7 categories with you. So this does not apply to everything. It definitely applies to money as well, right? One of the things, by the way, I don't know if you're aware of this, when you have a lot of coins at home, we accumulate a lot of coins, right? Dimes, nickels, whatever, and then you take that and you have, let's say, $1,000 worth of coins, and you take that to Walmart, and then the machine gives you $950. So essentially, Walmart bought $1,000 for $950. That is actually the very definition of riba, right? So you have to be careful when you engage in this type of behavior. I know it takes. Why do we take them to Walmart? Because we don't want to wrap them and take them to the bank. But if you wrap them properly and take them to the bank, get the kids to do it. I sit my kids down when they were little. I sat them down once a year, and we just for 7 hours, we're just working hard labor. They're working on wrapping the coins, and then I would just take them to the bank and I deposit them for their value. Okay, so that is riba al-fadl. And there is a narration where the Prophet ﷺ may have said, la riba illa riba nasi'a. The only form of riba is that of postponement. And it's said that Abdullah ibn Abbas kind of takes this and he dismisses the second category, and there is a category of scholars that follow him on this matter. But the rest of them, which is 99%, they say no. What the Prophet meant ﷺ was that there is a disparity between the items of the exchange. They were not of the same thing. It was a bartering kind of transaction as opposed to buying and selling. Now, going back to the story of Bilal, what would have made the transaction halal? What did Bilal need to do? He needed to sell it and take payment, and then use that payment, maybe go to another date merchant and then buy, a fresh pound of dates. That would have made it halal. And of course, when people hear this, they're like, wait a second, that's just silly. It's the same thing. Don't you hear this all the time? It's the same exact thing. What's the big deal? This is all just semantics, right? But isn't that the exact same thing that Quraysh used to say to the Prophet ﷺ? إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَى. A business transaction, buying and selling, is exactly like usury. And they were wrong, because one of them is halal and one of them is haram. There's a slight difference, but that slight difference was enough for God to declare war, on this particular sin.
Even,
Yes, please.
for clarification, if someone, say, has a car and he wants to change it to another car, you cannot give the car that's going to be $500 and get the newer car, because that's part of the transaction.
Are you going to, like, let's say, to a friend, or are you talking about the same exact car?
Well, so I have a car,
Mm-hmm.
2016, and I'm buying a car 2020, right? I give that to the dealer plus $1,000, right? That transaction is good. I'm doing a trade-in.
Yeah,
Partial value.
not necessarily. Not necessarily, and I think the reason is that when the Prophet ﷺ talked about the 7 categories where riba al-fadl is haram, those 7 categories were so easy and they're so simple, right? So dates from this year versus dates from last year. But once you get into the car, now there's a lot more disparities. Right now you're talking about make and model, you're talking about mileage, you're talking about mechanical condition. And so the car is not made of gold, it's not made of barley, it's not made of silver. So actually the scholars restricted what would be haram to those 7 categories alone. And the car is made of plastic and metal. So my personal opinion is that it would not be. Because you're specifying a value of this car, and the other guy is specifying a value for his car. And then you're basically exchanging, let's say that you are $700 short, then you pay him the $700. I don't think that is considered riba al-fadl. I think that is a separate category. But then we're going to explore that, inshallah, together further. What happened? Yeah, please.
Could you please help us relate this to the dates example you gave us? I'm having a hard time understanding it. So if the merchant would have said, Bilal, I'm going to pay you this amount for last year's date. I'm selling this year's date for this amount, therefore this is what you would get. Would that have made it halal?
In this particular case, it would not have made it halal. Because there isn't much enough disparity between the 2 sets of dates, because they belong to the same exact species. Yeah. It's essentially just a preference, this year's versus last year's. Or this gold that is made in Dubai versus gold that is made in Sacramento. Yeah, those are identical to each other. All the other attachments are just a matter of preference. But with 2 vehicles, it's not a matter of preference. This is a matter of actual difference between them. That, like, one would say, this one is a BMW and that one is a Mercedes. So they don't belong to the same species. The argument could be made. But I think in order to avoid that confusion, because there's an infinite amount of transaction, the Prophet ﷺ restricted it to the 7 categories. And he said that anything beyond those 7 categories, an exchange would not be considered riba al-fadl, only in those 7. And I want to give another example, by the way, to clarify this further. The payday, like check cashing facilities, for instance. How does that work? So let's say that you have your upcoming paycheck is on the 30th of the month, but today is the 20th and you need the money so badly. All right? So you give the right to the check cashing business to take possession of your paycheck when it's released. So let's say that you make $3,000, right? And today I want money today. So you go to check cashing. They will take the $3,000 from your paycheck when it's delivered. But today they're going to give you how much? They're going to give you $2,500. Okay? So essentially, what they did is that they bought $3,000 from you with the price of $2,500. And because time is also involved, this is actually one of the unique examples of both riba al-fadl and riba al-nasi'a simultaneously. So it's a double haram. Like I always say that those check cashing places, this is the absolute definition of riba in our modern times. This is the scariest thing ever. Remember, there used to be laws, by the way, that restricted interest rates. And those laws were ridiculous. I think it was like 40%. So it was still very, very high. And I think it was at the time of Reagan or something, or maybe Obama. Wallahi, I don't remember. But I think it was all the laws against any restriction on the percentages were completely repealed. And now they can charge you 150% if they wanted to. There's no limit to that. That's, again, the very definition of riba. I also wanted to comment on something here that is really important. In 1971, something very consequential happened that most people do not know. You know, who was president of the US in 1971? Nixon. Nixon was the president. Nixon issued a series of executive orders that were later on called Nixon's shock. Actually, go look it up on Wikipedia. Nixon's shock. And one of the things that one of the financial executive orders that Nixon issued, it's funny to later on realize that he was a total crook, right? But hey, he's the one that got discovered. He issued an executive order that decoupled the US dollar from what? From the gold standard. Prior to 1971, every single note, every single financial instrument was somehow backed up by and coupled with the gold standard. So it was a representation of that gold standard, one way or the other. And once that decoupling took place, now you're literally just dealing with papers. Those papers have value only to the extent that there is a military power that stands behind them. There is some international confidence. There is very strong manipulation of the media. Somehow the dollar took a life of its own, and it became like this thing that only has value because everyone else in the world wants it. But prior to Nixon's shock, the dollar had an intrinsic value because it was coupled with gold standard. And it is because of that some modern scholars do not consider bank loans to be riba, because they're saying riba has to do with gold and silver and the gold and silver standard, and once that decoupling took place, what you take from the bank is not qard anyway. In the hadith, كل قرض جاء بمنفعة حرام, or كل قرض جاء بمنفعة riba. Every loan that brings financial benefit is riba, but they would say that this is not a loan, rather this is a financing. Tamwil, that's the word that some modern scholars use. This is tamwil, this is financing, not riba. Therefore, because it is independent of gold standard, that I am just taking pieces of paper from the bank, and somehow those pieces of paper have value. I believe that they have value. Other people believe that they have value. The guy that's selling me the house believes that they have value. The car dealership believes that it doesn't mean that there's anything haram with it. This is a standard that society agreed upon, but it has nothing to do with the exploitation of riba. Of course, I have to share that with you as well in order to understand why there are modern disagreements about whether or not interest-based transactions are also riba. Inshallah, we're gonna stop here because actually we probably have a few more minutes to cover 275. I was hoping actually that we're gonna cover the ayat of riba today, but we might have to continue next time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَا لَا يَقُومُونَ إِلَّا كَمَا يَقُومُ الَّذِي يَتَخَبَّطُهُ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنَ الْمَسِّ. those who gorge themselves on usury, they behave as someone who is intoxicated or someone who rises as if they have some kind of a seizure. Someone that is possessed by shaitan or jinn. When does this happen, by the way? It happens in both dunya and akhirah, in this life and the next. People who engage in riba, they are constantly on the lookout for ways and opportunities to increase their wealth, to increase their rates, to increase their returns. And they absolutely freak out at the very possibility, at any tiny possibility that they may not make enough. And in the afterlife, they will rise as these people who are basically suffering from seizures, because they're like lost and absolutely intoxicated. Again, the scenery of the Quran here is really powerful and beautiful. It also applies in the affairs to the affairs of this dunya, in the sense that people who are engaged in constant riba, they are also worried, aren't they? Why are they concerned? If you have millions of dollars invested as loans, as riba-based or usury-based loans with other people, what is your concern? You could lose it. Or, am I making enough? Can I invest this somewhere else? My money is held up with this guy. Yes, he's giving me 5,000, but it could have been 7. It could have been 10. They're always struggling with the mental consternations of whether or not they are making enough, or whether or not they might lose their wealth. So again, all of that goes back to the characterization of the ayah. كَالَّذِي يَتَخَبَّطُهُ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنَ الْمَسِّ. It's almost that they have been possessed by shaitan, or demonized by shaitan. And why is that the case? ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَى. Their problem is that they equated a business transaction that involves selling, buying and selling. Oh, this is just like riba. وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made selling, buying and selling halal, but He made usury haram. And of course, we are not talking about buying money or selling money. Then both the commodity that is being bought and the commodity that is being sold, if the price of the commodity comes from the same species of that commodity, as we said earlier, then that would make it riba. So you cannot do that. You cannot buy dates with dates. You cannot buy money with money. You have to sell it for money and then take that money and then buy the other item that you are interested in. Let me go ahead and take a couple of questions from you guys, inshallah, before we do Salat al-Dhuhr. But I will continue the conversation on usury next week, inshallah ta'ala.
You talk about the example of gold, silver, gold, necklace with a new one. The value of craftsmanship and everything doesn't count into this transaction?
This is a very good question. You know, Brother Mundir is saying, what about the value of craftsmanship? And that does take account. You know, if the person that worked really hard on manipulating the gold and making it into, you know, some type of a very different type of necklace. You know, sometimes it has all these fancy designs, and it took hours and hours and hours, and salaries were paid, and, you know, electricity was spent, and so forth. That has to take account. But then it needs to be separated from the price of the gold itself. So your bill needs to say the gold is this much and craftsmanship is that much. That we can always work with and negotiate, but the problem is going to be in the first part, not the second part. Yes?
The example you said about date, exchanging the date, is basically an example of riba al-fadl?
Yes, correct. Because the two items are of the same species.
But it is the same species, but it's more like the quality and the quantity aspect.
Again, that's what the brother mentioned earlier, and I said that that is a preference. This is a personal preference type thing. You know, someone else might say, last year's dates are sweeter, and so there's a difference between personal preference and universal market standards, and that what sets a difference here. So in the example, for instance, of the car, they're both cars. But one of them is 1978 and the other one is a Mercedes AMG 2025. This is not a matter of preference for me. Everyone would agree that this one definitely has more value than the other one. And so the other piece here is that dates are on that list of the 7 categories that the Prophet ﷺ considered to be haram. Metal and plastic, they're not on that list. Does that make sense?
Could you mention the examples again that Prophet mentioned?
Gold, silver, dates, barley, and a type of wheat, and a couple of more, all plants.
Cannot be exchanged.
They cannot be exchanged because they are considered to be of the same species. Yeah. So you have to sell it, take the money, and then buy the other one.
What about card trading? Trading a card to
Yeah, that's what the brother asked earlier. And I said that if there is a disparity between the 2 cars in accordance with market value and not personal preferences, my opinion is that it would not be considered riba al-fadl. Guys, as you can see, we're being invaded by the Roman Empire. So we have to go pray dhuhr with them, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, subhanakallahum bihamdik. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.